Here's a hot take, but I would rather see you have really great horsemanship and do right by your horse than have good scores any day of the week. I actually think I kind of do a lot of things backwards because of this mentality. I see a lot of students of mine that started riding around the same time as students in more competitive barns, and they're feeling frustrated because their friends are able to jump higher or go to more shows or ride bigger horses or whatever the thing may be, and they're not doing that yet in my program. But what I always tell them is you are learning so much more about how to show up for your horse and how to be a good steward for your horse. And that's a lot harder success to measure, but I think in the long run, it's much more important. So today, that's what we're gonna be talking about, is how do we measure success based on how we show up for our horse and how we steward our horses versus the kind of vanity metrics of how well you're riding or performing. Hi, I'm Ruby. I'm a whole horsemanship trainer, and I'm on a mission to help you and your horse discover more magic by building a deeper bond and better connection, and also to enjoy and have more meaning in the slog of the day to day. And today we're going to be talking about basically why it is that I measure success in my students based on how well they ride on their worst day, not based on the vanity metrics of how high they jump or how fast their time or how high their score. So I had a student a few weeks ago. We were in the arena. She's been working so hard. She's a kid, and she is like one of the hardest working students I've had in a very long time. She shows up every single day. She practices hard. She does everything I tell her to do in between lessons. She never once complains, even as youngish, on the younger side. And she told me the other day, she's like, I'm starting to get a little frustrated because I feel like I have this friend who hasn't been riding as long as I have, and she's already jumping, and I would really like to be jumping. And I feel like I'm working so hard, and I'm just like, it's not happening. And what I told her is I can almost guarantee, without meeting her friend, that your friend is not as secure of a rider as you are, that your friend wouldn't know what to do when things go wrong the way that you do, that your friend doesn't have as good of a seat as you do, that your friend can't judge distances the way that you can. And even though we've been doing all of that so far on the flat or with ground poles, you are such a more nuanced and strong and correct rider, and you show up for your horse in all the best ways on the ground. You have a better relationship with your horse. Once you start jumping, it won't matter how high that fence is because you have all of this foundation, and I could probably put you on any horse in this barn by the time you start jumping, and you could jump them as well as any other person, because that's the way that I build my program. I build it based on foundations first, on sound biomechanics, on confidence, on good ethics and riding practices and developing a good relationship with your horse. And then all the other stuff is extra. All the vanity metrics and the shows and the scores and the high jumps and all of that, that doesn't even matter anymore, because now you're so good at this part that we can do whatever else we want. We can apply it any way we choose. I also have students that decide to change sports midway through their career, or that get a new horse and they get, sidetracked down this whole rabbit trail. And none of that even really matters that much in terms of their success or their career path with their horses, because they have such a strong foundation in like the absolute basics of any good riding program, right? And so what I think is a harder metric to measure your success by is how well you steward your horse. And I think that's why a lot of barns do it the way that they do. And there's nothing wrong, in my opinion. Like, I want to be very clear that I'm not hating on anybody. There's many, many, many ways to teach a riding program. And if you are signing up students with the kind of expectation that they're going to be showing soon and jumping soon, and everyone around them is doing that, it makes sense that you might get them jumping on safe horses a little bit earlier than I would on my herd of rescues because none of my horses are perfect. None of my horses are going to do it for you. I don't have any point and shoot horses. That's just not the kind of program I'm running. I'm teaching people how to ride a little bit more effectively, a little bit more scrappy. That's kind of what I'm after in the big picture, as opposed to having a pretty rider that can sit on a pretty horse and go perform well and get good scores. So how do we measure success when we take away the sort of, what I'm just going to keep referring to as the vanity metrics? One of the first ways that comes to mind is, what do you do on your worst rides? How do you handle situations when they go completely south, right? When we keep talking in the last few videos about how humans have a prefrontal cortex that is much more developed than the horse's prefrontal cortex. And while the horse also has one, this means that it is our responsibility as the rider to plan, to think through what's going to happen, to prepare our horse, to clue them in, right? The horse can't read a map. The horse can't read the jump course. So it's our job as the person with the bigger prefrontal cortex, the partner in this team with the bigger prefrontal cortex, to plan these things out and to help clue our horses into those plans. And when things go sideways and, you know, a dog comes running out of the bushes, or your horse trips and falls down, or you, I don't know, lose your stirrup when you're cantering and you get nervous that you might fall off. Whenever any of these kind of unexpected things might happen and come up, which they do all the time, this is real world riding, right? When real world things come up and they go wrong and we can't plan for that, how do you handle it? Can you pivot? Can you make a new plan? Can you keep yourself and your horse safe? Do you know when to quit? Do you know when to change your expectation for that day, right? I had a student the other day that was telling me, actually I had two students this week that went through this, that they had this beautiful ride with their horse, and then suddenly, almost out of nowhere, their horse decided that they were done and got super barn sour and refused to go past the gate, right? Or to go into the arena because the one was walking around. Anyway, doesn't really matter. The point is that the horse almost flipped a switch and decided it was time to be done. Different horses, different riders, different partners. But what we kind of came to with both of them, and I wasn't actually present for either of these were on their own, but what we came to was that sometimes you just have to know when to quit and when to say enough is enough for today and I'm not going to ask for more. And sometimes you have to know when to ask for the least, you know, lowest possible achievable goal. So if your horse suddenly gets really gate sour and doesn't want to go in the arena, even though you're not done riding yet, you might just say, my whole goal now, instead of finishing this ride, is just to walk through that gate. And as soon as we do, I'm going to be done for the day. Because I'm, as again, the person with the planning ability here, I'm hearing that my horse is saying that they don't want to do what I had planned for today. But I also know that they don't know what I had planned for today because they don't have a prefrontal cortex. And so all I'm going to do is walk in that gate and tell them that was all I wanted to do today. And we're going to go back to your stall and that's going to be it. And that's okay. You don't have to win the battle because, again, we're in a relationship. And if you win the battle, nobody actually wins, right? When one partner loses an argument or a confrontation, both actually end up losing, right? And the whole goal here is to build a better bond with your horse. So how do you set it up so that you can both find this new achievable goal, something much more attainable and small and something that you can celebrate the success over? So that's how I measure success. One of the ways in my riders is, what do you do when things go wrong? What do you do when the plan falls apart? How do you handle yourself in those situations? And how can we grow that muscle and that ability to be the better leader for your horse? The next metric that I look for is, does your horse look to you for support when they are confused or they are nervous? So I think a lot with this one about a horse that I used to have that was severely traumatized. I don't know exactly what happened. I wasn't privy to that information, but it was really clear with him that he was traumatized because he would go from totally calm and happy to like flip a switch explosive. And I'm pretty good at reading the horses that are just internalizing and they're like slowly building that pressure. He wasn't slowly building that pressure from what I could tell. It seemed like it really was like a PTSD response of, we're good, we're dying. And it was like that quick. And one of the metrics of success that I marked with him was when he started to see something that started to make him feel nervous. And instead of exploding, he looked at me and he waited to see, are you nervous? Because if you're not nervous, I might be okay. And that was a huge win. And I see this with other kind of less traumatized horses also, just when the bond starts to get deeper and the horse starts to actually look to the rider like, hey, is this what we're doing today? Or do you know about that dog in the bushes, right? And they actually look to the rider for their confidence and for reassurance in a situation. That is a huge win and a huge mark of your growth as a partnership. The next one is, can you feel more in your horse than you did before? So this is a really big one. So when you first started riding, I bet, and you might still be in this place, and it's okay if you are, because you will continue to grow, and here's how you'll know you are. you felt sometimes like your horse did things unexpectedly. They tripped unexpectedly. You were cantering along, it was lovely, and then all of a sudden you were walking and you were like, what happened? They pulled you to the gate unexpectedly. But as you get to be a better rider and a more refined rider, you can feel those things starting to happen before they actually do. So you can feel you're cantering along and you're losing that energy and you're like, my horse is about to break. I'm going to fix it now before it gets that far. That is the mark of a successful rider and a much more advanced rider than the one that gets caught off guard by those little changes. And the final one is, can you ride in a really seamless and quiet and still way? This is somewhat a matter of strength and balance, but also somewhat a matter of actually having a deep enough connection and bond with your horse that you don't have to ask loudly. If you want to know more about that, watch this video about how to use the trot to deepen your relationship with your horse. It goes into a lot of detail about that, and I think it will be really helpful to you. And until next time, make sure to hug your horse for me.